In our chapter on miscellaneous TLS topics, we have reached a lesson dedicated to explaining the main difference between the role of a client and the role of a server within TLS and the difference between their respective X.509 certificates. Starting with the question on what the main differences are between the role of a client and the role of a server within TLS, the first and possibly obvious difference is that the client is the peer that initiates the TLS connection by sending a client hello message. The server is then the peer that does not initiate the TLS connection but replies to a client hello message with a server hello message. The second difference between a client and a server is now a difference that's essential to the security of a TLS connection, as within a TLS connection, the server is always authenticated, but the client is only optionally authenticated on explicit request by the server. Having clarified the major differences between the client and the server, let us now proceed to investigate the differences in the X.509 certificates used by the client and the server. To explain the differences in the X.509 certificates used by the client and the server, we need to know that version 3 X.509 certificates contain an optional field called extended key usage, which is a field that captures the intended purposes of the public key listed in the certificate. If a version 3 X.509 certificate includes such an extended key usage field, then the public key contained in the certificate must only be used for the intended purposes listed in this field. Two of the intended purposes available to list within an extended key usage field are the purposes of server authentication and client authentication. If a version 3 X.509 certificate then only has server authentication set within its extended key usage field, then the public key contained in the certificate can only be used for authenticating an endpoint, assuming the server role within a TLS connection. Vice versa, if only the client authentication flag is set within an extended key usage field, then the public key contained in the X.509 certificate can only be used for authenticating an endpoint, assuming the client role within a TLS connection. However, if both server authentication and client authentication are set within an extended key usage field, then the public key contained in the X.509 certificate can be used for authenticating an endpoint, assuming either the client or the server role within a TLS connection. On the left side of this slide, I have a picture of the X.509 certificate used by the web server serving IBM's IBM.com domain. If we look into the extended key usage field of this IBM.com certificate, we can see that the intended purpose of the public key contained in this certificate is set to both server authentication and client authentication, indicating that this certificate serving IBM.com could be used for either server authentication or client authentication. There is not much else to it, but this is nevertheless very important to know, as it's now clear that not just any certificate can be used by the server or the client, but that the certificates used by the server or the client need to have the intended purposes properly set within the X.509 version 3 extended key usage field.